Look at the left side of your screen. That's raw, unedited footage. Now look at the right. The coloring, the time-lapse, the specific cuts, these edits transform a mundane street into a narrative construction. Welcome to a deep dive into the architecture of nonfiction storytelling. This material is prepared by the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Odisha State Open University, OSU, Sambalpur. We're exploring the documentary production syllabus today, specifically looking at a core paradox. How do filmmakers negotiate the boundary between artistic interpretation and factual storytelling? Joining me to map this out is our documentary studies expert. It comes down to the mode of representation. A filmmaker makes a sequence of technical and ethical choices: where to place the camera, whether to use a voiceover, if they interact with the subject. Those choices dictate the kind of reality the audience ultimately sees. Every documentary mediates reality through deliberate, constructed choices. We are analyzing the specific frameworks filmmakers use to perform that mediation. We analyze these frameworks using a spectrum of authoritarian intervention. This diagram maps exactly how much the filmmaker interferes with the subject. The x-axis plots the narrative focus, running from objective fact on the left to subjective emotion on the right. The y-axis measures the filmmaker's presence, from an invisible creator at the top to a highly visible participant at the bottom. Let's start in the top left quadrant with the expositional mode. This sits at the highest point of authoritative truth. The filmmaker relies on logical argument structure and what we call voice of God narration. The creator remains invisible, presenting an argument supported by heavy factual documentation. Think of an inconvenient truth. The film uses a strict expository structure, building its case through direct data visualization, graphs, and expert commentary. It guides the audience to a specific interpretation of the information. Another example is Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos. Intricate scientific concepts are elucidated through breathtaking imagery and his authoritative narration. The format educates by constructing a highly structured, unassailable factual argument. Moving down slightly from that voice of God authority, we hit the observational mode. Correct, the strict rule here is the fly-on-the-wall technique. The filmmaker strips away narration, staged interviews, and artificial lighting. They let events unfold spontaneously, relying on visual elements and ambient sound to carry the narrative. A foundational text for this is the 1960 documentary Primary, which followed John F. Kennedy's campaign. By removing external commentary, it offered the public an unmediated look at political life, exactly as it transpired. And from that observational baseline, we get specialized offshoots, like the ethnographic documentary. Yes, filmmakers engage with specific cultural groups over extended periods to document rituals and social frameworks. The goal is deep anthropological immersion and the preservation of heritage with minimal direct interference. We also see the biographical documentary function as a structured offshoot. It merges factual narratives and archival materials, like letters and photographs, to critically examine an individual's legacy, maintaining a focus on historical accuracy while tracing a personal timeline. The primary objective across these observer modes is to erase the presence of the filmmaker. By hiding the camera and the creator, the film emphasizes the unvarnished appearance of the images on screen. But observation has its limits. If we move down the y-axis into the visible filmmaker quadrants, the creator moves into the frame. Exactly. Down here, we find the participatory mode. The filmmaker becomes an active, visible participant in the story. Their personal journey and direct engagement with subjects become the actual narrative thread holding the film together. Michael Moore built his career on this mode. He operates as an on-screen provocateur, using direct, confrontational interactions to investigate political issues. His perspective serves as the primary lens for the viewer. Or consider Morgan Spurlock's Supersize Me. It's a radical application of participatory filmmaking because Spurlock uses his own body as the central case study, tracking the biological consequences of his own active participation in the subject matter. And sitting next to participatory on our matrix is the reflexive mode. The reflexive mode takes visibility a step further. This is the meta-documentary. Instead of just participating in the events, the film introspectively examines the filmmaking process itself. Its core function is to dismantle the facade of objectivity. It candidly acknowledges how editing choices, camera placement, and narrative structures influence the final outcome. It forces the viewer to critically assess how media shapes their understanding of reality. This isn't a new concept. In 1929, Dziga Vertov created Man with a Movie Camera, an avant-garde examination of Soviet life that simultaneously documented the act of filming that very life. He deconstructed the medium while inventing it. By making the creator explicitly visible, participatory and reflexive documentaries acknowledge their own construction. They present a truth that is based entirely on interaction, rather than passive observation. Now, let's push across the x-axis into the subjective emotion half of our matrix. We are moving away from strict objective facts. Here, we encounter the performative mode. This represents a complete shift toward personal, emotionally charged narratives. The filmmaker prioritizes their subjective lived experience and internal feelings over factual precision. Performative documentaries often utilize highly stylized cinematography, reenactments, and abstract visuals. These tools allow filmmakers to express meanings that transcend factual representation, making it effective for exploring complex themes like trauma, identity, and memory. What about documentaries designed to create immediate political results? That's the advocacy mode. It shares DNA with expository films because it presents an argument, but its primary intent differentiates it. Advocacy is built around a compelling call to action. The architecture of an advocacy film is designed to elicit strong emotional reactions. Filmmakers frequently collaborate with activist movements and nonprofits, using emotionally resonant narratives and startling statistics to incite policy reforms or social change. And at the absolute extreme edge of our subjective axis, we find the poetic mode. It completely abandons linear narrative and factual presentation. The technical characteristics of the poetic mode eschew conventional explanations. Filmmakers build a meditative tone using symbolic visuals, slow motion sequences, rhythmic editing, and immersive soundscapes. It invites the audience to derive their own interpretations of meaning. By explicitly prioritizing subjective emotion, these modes often succeed in communicating a much deeper, universally resonant emotional truth. The feeling becomes the fact. Let's look at the outer limits of the taxonomy, the experimental forms that actively blend scripted fiction with reality. We categorize these as docufiction and hybrid documentaries. Rather than adhering to documentary purism, these forms redefine established norms by integrating scripted scenes and actors into a factual framework. The technical methodology relies on juxtaposition. Filmmakers will weave dramatized or staged sequences alongside archival footage and real-life interviews. It enriches historical investigations by providing visual depth where literal footage falls short. Which brings us to the animated documentary. Yes, a highly pioneering approach. The precise utility of the animated mode is its ability to reconstruct events that completely lack visual records. It illustrates abstract psychological ideas, and crucially, it can safeguard the identities of vulnerable subjects while preserving their authentic audio testimonials. These boundary-blurring modes prove that documentary truth isn't limited by the availability of raw footage. It is defined by the authenticity of the overarching narrative. So our matrix is full, from the rigid facts of expository logic to the abstract emotion of poetic cinema. We have 12 distinct methodologies for capturing reality. As a filmmaker, how do you actively choose the correct framework for your subject? Selection is never just an aesthetic preference. It dictates the project's ethics and the specific type of truth the filmmaker intends to uncover. The chosen mode must align with the nature of your subject matter. You must evaluate the availability of your archival data, the vulnerability of your subjects, and the specific relationship you want to cultivate with your audience. Looking at the course outcomes for this module, the syllabus demands exactly this kind of structural thinking. Students must develop concepts, apply camera and sound tools, and edit their content under strict ethical and legal frameworks. The theory dictates the practical application, and that practical application is facing immediate disruption. Outcome 6 requires us to evaluate the role of artificial intelligence in production. AI will inevitably generate synthetic media that complicates these boundaries further, forcing documentary frameworks to evolve again. Mastering these taxonomies treating the camera as a tool for translation rather than a passive recorder, is the core objective of documentary craft. Thank you.